Didn't cry. I made a spreadsheet. That's how I knew things had gotten serious. Not when I found the paperwork. Not when I called the bank. Not even when the fraud investigator at TD used the word criminal in the same sentence as my mother-in-law's name. I knew it was serious when I sat down at my kitchen table in Guelph at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, opened the blank Excel file, and started logging every transaction I could find going back 14 months. Some people fall apart. I organize. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I'm 31, I'm a physiotherapist. I work 4 days a week at a clinic in town, and for 6 years I saved carefully and quietly in a way that nobody in my husband's family ever took seriously. Not because they were cruel exactly, just because they never thought I'd actually follow through. People like me, apparently, didn't end up with anything worth protecting. I should tell you about my mother-in-law first, because she's the whole story. She moved to Canada from Quebec City in her 20s, married my father-in-law, raised 2 boys in a semi-detached in Hamilton. My father-in-law passed away 4 years ago, heart attack, very sudden, and after that she moved in with her sister in Ancaster and seemed, for a while, to be doing fine. She had her routines, she had her book club, she had her older son, my husband's brother, whom she called every Sunday without fail. And then she met a man at a grief support group, and within 8 months, she was talking about buying a condo together in Burlington. I want to be careful here, because I don't think grief makes people do things. I think character does. And her character, I'd had hints of it before. The way she'd ask my husband how much I made, casually, like it was small talk. The way she'd say things like, "It's so nice that you two have been saving," in a tone that meant she'd been thinking about it. The comment she made at Easter 2 years ago, just once, just briefly, that when the time came, she hoped the family would be generous with helping her settle somewhere comfortable. My husband laughed it off. I didn't forget it. When she announced the condo purchase, she said it was joint financing with the man from her grief group. I'll call him her partner, because that's what he became. And that they were just a little short on the down payment. Just a little. She used that phrase 3 times in the same conversation. Just a little short. She said the bank had been difficult. She said the interest rates were brutal right now. She said she'd always been so proud of how responsible we were with money. My husband said he'd think about it. I said nothing. That night I checked our joint account, our TFSA, our RRSP balances. Everything was where it should be. I checked again in the morning. Still fine. What I didn't think to check was my credit report. I'd had an alert set up years ago, one of those free ones through Borrowell, but I'd gotten so many routine notifications over the years that I'd started ignoring the emails. Low priority, I had it filtered, which is how it took me 4 days to notice the flag. A hard inquiry from a mortgage broker I had never heard of, filed 11 days before she'd had that condo conversation with us. I remember sitting in my car in the clinic parking lot on my lunch break, reading that email 3 times. I remember the particular quality of the silence after I understood what I was looking at. Not panic, something colder. I called Borrowell. Then I called Equifax directly. Then I pulled my full credit report. There was a second inquiry. A different broker, different date, same period. And a note I didn't recognize. A soft pull from a financial services company whose name I'd never seen, filed under a property address in Burlington that was not mine. I drove back into work. I did my 2:30 appointment. I mobilized someone's shoulder and explained home exercises and smiled and said, "See you next week." And then I sat in a small staff bathroom for 6 minutes with the lights off, and I thought about exactly what I was going to do before I said a single word to anyone. This is the part people don't understand about being calm. It's not that you don't feel anything, it's that the feeling goes somewhere useful. I called TD that evening and asked to speak to someone in the fraud department. The woman I spoke to was professional and patient and walked me through a process I'd never needed before. She asked whether I had authorized anyone else to access my banking information or provide my SIN to a third party. I said no. She paused in a way that told me this was not the answer she'd been hoping to hear. I asked her to tell me what they had. There had been an inquiry filed using my full legal name, my date of birth, and my social insurance number attached to a mortgage pre-approval application for a property in Burlington. The application had gone through a broker I'd never heard of. The broker had submitted it as a joint application. The second applicant was my mother-in-law. I wrote this down in my notebook. Date, name of broker, application type, property address. I wrote it in the same handwriting I use for patient notes. Then I opened Excel. I didn't tell my husband that night. I know that sounds strange. We've been together 8 years. We're close. I trust him completely. But I'd watched him absorb difficult things about his family before, and I'd watched it take days before he could think straight about any of it. I needed to be straight first. I needed to know what I had. So I spent the next 5 days gathering. I found out that in Ontario, accessing someone's credit file without their consent is a violation of the Consumer Reporting Act. I found out that using someone's SIN to submit a joint mortgage application without their knowledge is identity fraud under the Criminal Code of Canada. I found out that there are protections specific to this kind of case, not military in our situation, but equally concrete. If fraud is proven and funds move, you're looking at charges under Section 380, potentially 380 fines, over a certain threshold. I'm a physiotherapist. I understand the body in pieces. I've learned that you don't treat pain. You find the source and you treat that. On day 3, I contacted a lawyer. Not a big firm. Just a woman in Guelph who did a lot of financial fraud work. I explained the situation in a single email. She called me the same afternoon and said, "Don't move anything, don't close anything, don't say anything to the people involved yet." I said I know. She said most people don't know. She sounded surprised when I said it. On day 4, I found the second thing. I'd been going through the mortgage application documents that the broker had been required to provide me with once I submitted the fraud complaint, and buried in the package was a line item that stopped me for a long time. A gift letter. In Canadian mortgage applications, a gift letter is used to confirm that part of a down payment is being given to the applicant as a gift, not a loan, which matters because it affects how the bank calculates debt load. This one stated that the sum of $42,000 had been gifted to my mother-in-law by her daughter-in-law, my name, my SIN, my address, and that the funds were a family gift with no expectation of repayment. I read it twice. There was a signature at the bottom. It was not my signature. I've never been precious about conflict. I grew up in a family where things got named directly and dealt with, which I know is not everyone's experience. But something about seeing my forged name on a legal document attached to $42,000 I'd never agreed to give anyone. Something about that specific thing made me very, very quiet in a way that lasted for a long time. I scanned the document. I emailed it to my lawyer with the subject line, "Found the gift letter." She called within the hour. Then I told my husband, "I don't want to spend too long here, because this is the part that still hurts, in a way I'm not finished with." He didn't disbelieve me. I want to be clear about that. He saw the documents. He understood immediately what he was looking at. He said her name in a voice I'd never heard from him before. But there was also this look on his face that I recognized from years of watching him process his family. This look that meant the ground had shifted and he didn't know where to stand yet. He asked if we were sure. I showed him the signature. He went quiet. He asked what I wanted to do. I said I'd already started. My lawyer had contacted a mortgage fraud investigator through the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit. The broker had been cooperative once the fraud flag went up. They had no interest in being associated with a fraudulent application, and they'd been thorough in their own documentation. The IP address logged on the application portal traced back to a library in Ancaster, my mother-in-law's sister's neighborhood, 2 blocks away. This is the part that had taken the planning. My mother-in-law didn't know any of it had unraveled. As far as she knew, she was still waiting on a callback from the broker about whether the application had cleared. The condo closing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in mid-November, Burlington. My mother-in-law and her partner were going to sign the final papers at a notary's office. My lawyer made a call. I drove to Burlington on a grey Thursday morning. I wore the dark green coat I wear to professional meetings. I had a folder. Inside was a copy of the gift letter, a copy of the fraud report, a copy of the IP logs the broker had provided, and a document my lawyer had prepared for the RCMP investigator to formally receive. The notary's office smelled like recycled air and stale coffee. There was a rubber plant in the corner that had clearly been there since the 90s. I sat in the waiting area for 11 minutes. My mother-in-law walked in with her partner, and she saw me and stopped walking completely. I stood up. I said, "I just need a few minutes before you sign anything." Her partner looked at her. She had gone a color I don't have a word for. My lawyer had briefed the notary ahead of time. Nothing dramatic, just a professional courtesy so they weren't blindsided. The notary asked us to step into a side room. I handed her the folder. She didn't open it right away. She looked at me instead. And then she said something I've thought about many times since, because it revealed so much about how she'd constructed this in her own mind. She said, "I was going to pay it back." I said, "That's not how gift letters work." She said, "You have so much. You've always had so much." I said, "That's not true, and you know it isn't, and even if it were, that's not what this is about." She opened the folder then. She looked at the gift letter for a long time. She looked at the IP logs. She turned to the RCMP document last, and her partner leaned over to read it and stood up very straight. The closing did not happen that Thursday. The investigation took 4 months. I want to be honest about those 4 months because they were not clean or simple. My husband's brother called once to say we were destroying the family. My husband said very little publicly and a great deal privately to me. My mother-in-law hired a lawyer who sent a letter suggesting the signature discrepancy might be a clerical error, which my lawyer described as creative. The RCMP investigator was methodical and thorough. He had seen this kind of thing before, a dull child's financial information used by a parent, usually someone who didn't understand or didn't care that it was a crime. He said it happened more than people realized, especially around property purchases, especially in families where financial boundaries had never been clearly established. I thought about the Easter comment. It's so nice that you've been saving. In February, she entered a diversion program through the Crown. Not a full trial, her lawyer negotiated that, but formal acknowledgement of the fraud, restitution requirements, conditions. Her partner, as far as I know, was not charged, though the broker flagged the application to their own compliance office. My husband's brother has not called since. My husband and I are okay. Better than okay, in ways that surprised me. I think there's a particular kind of closeness that comes from going through something hard with someone and finding out they can hold it without breaking. He held it. She has my cell number. She hasn't used it. Some people in our lives have said I should have warned her, that I could have given her a chance to step back before it went to the RCMP. I've thought about that. I've thought about it honestly, not defensively. But here's what I know. The application was filed 11 days before she had that condo conversation with us. She didn't tell us she was a little short and then, in a moment of desperation, make a bad decision. She filed the fraud first. The conversation was cover. The just a little short and the flattery about how responsible we were, that was performance. That was her seeing if we'd offer voluntarily before she had to rely on what she'd already done. She made a plan. I just made a better one. The condo she ended up not buying is still listed on realtor.ca. I know because I checked once by accident and then closed the tab. My TFSA is intact. My credit report has been corrected. I have a letter on file with Equifax noting the fraudulent inquiry and a case number I keep in a folder at the back of my desk drawer. My lawyer sent me a note after it was all resolved. It said, "You are the most organized client I've ever had for something this difficult." I don't know if that's a compliment, but I keep the note anyway. There's a specific silence that comes after you've closed something properly. Not the silence of things left unsaid. Not the silence of holding back. The silence of a door you locked yourself from your side with a key only you have. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like finally getting to stop. There's a version of the story where I said nothing, where I saw the credit alert, felt the cold drop in my stomach, and then talked myself out of it, where I told myself it was probably a mistake, probably administrative, probably something that would sort itself out. I know that version exists because I almost lived it. For about 48 hours after I pulled that credit report, I sat with the knowledge and did nothing except go to work and come home and stare at the ceiling. What changed wasn't courage, exactly. It was something quieter than that. It was the moment I realized that doing nothing was also a choice, and that choice had consequences too. My mother-in-law had made a calculation. She'd looked at my life, at the years I'd spent building something careful and steady, and she'd decided that her need was larger than my right to be asked. That's not a misunderstanding. That's not a moment of desperation that got out of hand. That's a decision made in full awareness of what it would cost me, and a belief that I either wouldn't notice or wouldn't act. She was wrong about the second part. And I think, in her quieter moments, she probably knew she would be. What I keep coming back to is how much of this came down to paying attention, not suspicion. I wasn't watching her. I wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. Just the ordinary discipline of knowing what's yours, checking on it, treating your own financial life as something worth understanding. The Barwell alert had been sitting in my filtered inbox for 4 days. 4 days. If I'd left it another week, the closing might have gone through. The $42,000 might have moved, and I'd have spent the next year trying to unwind something that had already been legally signed. That's the thing about integrity, not just having it, but being organized enough to protect what it produces. The savings were mine because I'd been honest and consistent and patient for years. But that honesty alone wouldn't have been enough if I hadn't also been willing to act when something threatened it. Goodness without backbone isn't goodness. It's just availability. I'm not angry at my mother-in-law in the way I expected to be. I was, for a while. But what I feel now is something more like clarity. She showed me exactly who she was, and because I was paying attention, I got to respond on my own terms instead of hers. Carter, my husband, had to do one of the hardest things a person can do, which is hold the truth about someone he loves without flinching from it. He did it. That matters to me more than I know how to say. The investigator told me that most people in fraud cases like this feel guilty for reporting a family member. He said they second-guessed themselves for months. I understood why. There's a version of loyalty that says you protect the people you're connected to, even when they've hurt you. But I think real loyalty, the kind worth having, runs in both directions. It asks something of everyone. I came, I showed the documents, and I let the fact do what facts do. The TFSA is still there. The credit report is clean. And the silence she's chosen since then is the only answer I needed.